At first, you thought you were lucky. She appeared like something that couldn't be explained. Beautiful, in a way that left you silent. Intense, in a way that left you unsettled. Everything about her made you believe that finally, after all the heartbreaks, you had met someone different. The pull between you two wasn't like anything before. It wasn't ordinary love. It was fierce. It was fast. It made you feel as if losing her would mean losing the rest of your life. You loved her with everything. You poured your energy, time, mind, even your clarity into that relationship, and she always knew how to keep you there. A gentle enough word, a tear at the right time, a soft enough glance made you believe you were loving something precious no one else could have. But then, years later, you woke up in your own home, with dark circles from too many sleepless nights, with a heavy mind. No more laughter. With a sense of distance even as she lay beside you, you were no longer sure if you were loving or enduring. No longer sure if this love was growing you or wearing you down piece by piece. And if deep down, you once loved someone who made you tired more than happy, who made you anxious more than at peace, leave just one sentence. I've been there. Because this isn't only your story. It's the story of many who loved wrong but were never taught how to see it. You once thought it was deep love, a connection beyond reason, an intensity so strong you couldn't walk away. Even on the days you were drained by the very relationship itself. You called it love. But in truth, you were addicted. Not addicted to her as a person, but addicted to the emotions she created. The feeling of being pursued by her, then ignored, then suddenly forgiven. The feeling that every time she came back after anger, you felt loved as if you had never been hurt. You accepted the chaos, just to hold on to those sweet seconds like an antidote. But that wasn't love. It was a form of emotional dependency, a cycle of highs and lows like dopamine addiction. She gave you a high dose, then withdrew it suddenly, then gave just enough back to keep you from leaving. She didn't need you happy. She needed you dependent. Needed you chasing, apologizing, trying, fearing to lose her. And you thought that effort proved you loved deeply. But the truth was, you were only sinking further into a state of losing control. Real love makes you feel safe, steady, and free to be yourself. What you were experiencing made you feel afraid. Afraid of mistakes, afraid of her anger, afraid of losing something you had invested too much in to let go. She didn't give you love. She gave you dependence. She didn't make you better. She tied you with anxiety. And you could no longer tell what was real emotion and what was manipulation. This relationship didn't lead to happiness. It only made you drift further from yourself while believing you were in love. She didn't know how to love instability. Calm made her uneasy. When everything was too complete, too smooth, too comfortable, she began to feel empty. Because to her, love wasn't stillness. Love was climax. It was collision. It was something that always made the heart crash into and then break apart. You didn't understand why the happiest days always ended in an argument. Everything seemed fine. You did right. You cared. You listened. But suddenly, she was sad, and you were pulled back into the same familiar cycle. She grew distant. You were confused. You were blamed for something vague. You apologized. She forgave. You grew close again. And soon after, it repeated. You lived as if walking on a minefield, not knowing when something you said would become the reason she pulled away. Shut down. Got angry. Or exploded. You slowly lost your sense of safety. But didn't Dari leave? Because the sweet moments after the storms were too real, too rare, too precious, making you willing to endure the whole storm just to keep a few minutes of clear skies. But the truth is, you weren't loving a woman. You were loving a cycle of unstable emotions where you became the only one who had to adjust, to take responsibility, to hold everything from breaking. And the cruelest part is, she didn't mean to hurt you. She just didn't know how to love in any rhythm other than chaos. And you, day by day, learned to love even the things that hurt you, until pain itself became the standard you called love. Women who haven't healed often don't make a scene. They don't break things. Don't scream. Don't use harsh words to scare you. They choose silence. A kind of silence that's cold, deep, heavy enough to make you search for faults in things you never thought were wrong. They don't give orders. They just look at you in a way that makes you feel like you've done something terribly wrong. They don't question you. They just withdraw their warmth as a punishment you're not allowed to resist. You don't clearly remember what triggered the shift. An innocent comment, a joke, a late return home. Any small thing could become the reason the air between you changes. She doesn't accuse you with words. She just makes you feel guilty. And then, without being asked, you apologize. You try to make peace. Fix it. Explain. Prove that you meant no harm. But the more you do, the deeper you sink into the role of the one who hurt her. Even though, in reality, you don't know exactly what you did, only that you made her sad. And as a reflex, you start fearing it will happen again. You begin to lose your boundaries. You choose your words more carefully. Hold back your true feelings. Avoid topics she doesn't like. You're no longer yourself, just trying to keep her from turning cold again. At some point, you stopped living like a man in love and started acting like a child, trying to please a woman who might withdraw her affection at any moment if displeased. You weren't threatened by noise. You were suffocated by silence. And in that silence, you lost your inner voice without even knowing it. You once thought it was love, a kind of love where you were willing to step back, compromise, soften, just to keep the relationship peaceful. You didn't realize that. Little by little, you were giving up the right to make decisions in your own life. At first, you skipped a few gatherings with friends because she wasn't happy. Then you changed the way you dressed, the way you spoke, the way you socialized, to avoid upsetting her. You stayed quiet when you disagreed, not because you didn't have an opinion, but because you knew, the moment you pushed back, things would become tense. Every time you chose something for yourself, she made you feel guilty, not with harsh words, but with coldness. Distant looks, vague remarks that made you doubt yourself. You started asking for her opinion on everything, even things you used to be confident about, not because you didn't know how to choose, but because you feared choosing wrong by her standards. You called it respect, but in truth, it was a form of control that had crept into every small decision in your life. You were no longer the initiator. You became the reactor. You lived to avoid disappointing her, no longer living in alignment with yourself. And the most ironic part was, you stayed quiet because you were tired. Tired of always guessing what was right. Tired of keeping the peace while the other person made no effort. You stepped back to avoid conflict. And then she said, "You don't care anymore." You didn't give up. You were just wearing down in silence. And she didn't see it. Or didn't want to. Because everything was still within her control. While you had grown too used to stepping aside to keep the peace. But that wasn't love. It was control disguised as affection, making you confuse love with submission. She didn't stop testing your limits. Today it was an outburst over a small comment. Tomorrow it was prolonged silence that left you guessing in vain. Then suddenly, an emotional explosion over something insignificant. Each time you tried to make peace, you told yourself it was patience. You were preserving the relationship. You were proving your love. But in reality, each time you forgave without being respected in return, you were digging a small hole, burying pieces of your self-worth in it. She didn't need to say it, but you knew, if you spoke up, you'd be turned into the one at fault. If you reacted, you'd be labeled as lacking compassion. If you stayed silent, you only made it easier for the injustice to repeat. And you began living in the gray area between right and wrong. You knew you were being hurt, but no longer had the strength to reclaim your boundaries. You called it enduring out of love. But in truth, you were in a state of resignation because you no longer believed your boundaries were worth being respected. Every small act of hers broke a boundary, and you, instead of rebuilding it, just took another step back to avoid the storm. Over time, you no longer knew what your limits were, no longer dared to ask for the bare minimum, no longer spoke up when disrespected, no longer protected yourself. You thought you were strong because you endured, but endurance without respect is just a quiet form of existence in a relationship that lost its balance long ago. And if you keep calling that love, you will keep living in a kind of love that only takes from you and never gives any part of you back. She didn't hate that you were successful. She didn't stop you from making money, growing, stepping out into the world. But deep down, every time you became stronger, more confident, more capable, she started to worry. Not worry for you, but worry about her place in the relationship. She needed you in a weaker position, not to hurt you, but because the feeling of control made her feel safe. And every time you stepped out of dependency, she pulled you back, not with restrictions, but with emotions. A bit of sulking when you spent too much time on work, a disappointed look when you talked about your future plans, a soft reminder that you're changing, as if growing up was somehow a wrongdoing. You started adjusting yourself. You slowed down, skipped a few opportunities, turned down an important meeting, dimmed the things that made you shine just to hold on to someone who was starting to feel left behind. And at some point, you began failing unconsciously. You delayed. You lost motivation. You were no longer the energized version of yourself. No one told you to be small, but you shrank yourself to avoid hurting her insecurity. You folded your dreams. You took down your belief in yourself. You stepped out of the light, thinking that keeping this relationship mattered more than anything. But in that compromise, you lost yourself. Without realizing, you stopped talking about what you longed for. You no longer walked into a room with your head high. You were no longer the man you once promised yourself you'd become. She didn't hate your strength. She just needed you to stay within reach. And if you let that repeat long enough, you'll live your life as a man who gave up on himself to hold on to someone who wasn't ready to grow with you. You start each day as if turning on an emotional weather forecast, not to know if it's rain or sunshine, but to know if she'll be cheerful or distant, gentle or silent, loving or cold. You walk into the house not with comfort, but with a constant sense of alertness, as if one wrong breath could shift everything. You don't know what will make her upset. And worse, you don't know what will keep the peace lasting more than a few hours. Every word you say, you censor yourself. Every action you take, you replay in your head 3 times to make sure it won't be misunderstood. But no matter how hard you try, there's always something, not enough. And once again, you become the one at fault. Once again, you apologize. Once again, you brace yourself to explain. Once again, you step back. You're not living. You're surviving in a state of defense. You're no longer yourself. You're who you've been forced to become to avoid endless conversations, heavy silent stares, and the unpredictable withdrawal of affection. You're tired, but don't dare to complain. You want rest, but don't dare to stop. You feel invisible, but keep telling yourself, it's love. That love always requires sacrifice, that everyone has weaknesses, and you're just being understanding. But the truth is, love doesn't make you live in fear, doesn't make you anxious every time you speak, doesn't make you shrink yourself bit by bit to fit someone else's emotional instability. And if every day you feel tired, worried, tense, afraid, then you're not in love. You're enduring, and the saddest part is, you call it something beautiful just to justify a reality that's been distorted for far too long. One day, you look in the mirror and no longer recognize yourself. There's no fire in your eyes, no life in your face. You're standing there, in the house that used to be a home, but it feels like you're living somewhere that no longer belongs to you. You've drifted away from friends you were once close to. You no longer join the gatherings. The activities that once brought you joy. You've left behind the hobbies, the little pleasures, because you no longer have the time, the mind, or the energy. Every night, you toss and turn, your thoughts racing, wondering what you did wrong today, thinking how you'll have to try tomorrow just to avoid another fight. You can't sleep. You're exhausted. You start feeling anxious for no clear reason, and the scariest part is, you're not looking forward to a new day. You're stuck in a nameless cycle. Silence, conflict, make up, repeat. Each time you make up, you call it hope. Each time you're hurt, you call it a test. But deep down, you know you're running empty, out of strength, out of faith, out of self-respect. And then you reach your deepest fear. You're more afraid of leaving than staying. Because if you leave, you'll have to face the truth that you were wrong, that you loved the wrong person, that all these years you stayed in a place that stopped being good for you. You're afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over, afraid to admit that the one you loved with all you had didn't love you the way you deserve. But you also know, if you keep staying, you'll only become a shadow of yourself, and no one can save you unless you start to realize you've traded too much just to hold on to something that no longer holds on to you. Awakening doesn't come from a dramatic moment. It comes quietly, when you're too tired to keep compromising, when you no longer have the strength to prove every day that you deserve to be loved, when you realize true love doesn't require exhausting effort just to survive. You don't need someone who makes you strain just to fit their emotions. Don't need to read between the lines. Keep your distance. Monitor your words. Limit yourself just to stay. You don't need to deserve it every day, like love is some conditional reward. True love doesn't make you feel suffocated. It doesn't ask you to give up who you are. Doesn't make you live in anxiety and doubt. True love gives you space to breathe, to live, to grow. It doesn't demand that you trade your self-respect for closeness. And if what you're calling love makes you feel suffocated, small, drained, that's not love. That's dependence dressed in affection, a bond you need clarity to break free from. Not because you're lacking worth, but because you deserve a healthy love, one that doesn't ask you to sacrifice yourself. Your withdrawal is not a failure. It's survival. It's the decision to choose yourself after too many times of putting others first. It's the first step on the path of healing, not to fight someone, but to find the man who once believed he deserved peace. You don't need a love that makes you shrink. You need a love gentle enough to let you be yourself, without fear of needing permission. You're not weak for loving the wrong person. You were simply someone who once trusted, who once placed your heart in the hands of someone not mature enough to keep it whole. You loved with everything. You stayed longer than you should have. You sacrificed. You endured. You tried so hard that you no longer recognized yourself in the life you once wanted to build. But that doesn't make you any less worthy. It only shows that your heart was once big enough to accept even what was never meant to be held. And the awakening you feel today is not shame, but a beginning. You don't need to go back and fix what's broken. You just need to be strong enough not to repeat it again. No revenge. No reclaiming anything. Just stand up. Keep going. Gently, clearly, and without forgetting who you are. If you once traded yourself to hold on to a love that broke you, leave just one sentence. I am returning to myself, because in the end, not every love is worth keeping, but you are always worth saving.